The first topic is foundations of obedience. Have you ever wondered why we obey? Is it fear, respect, or something deeper? Something hardwired into our very DNA. Today, we're going to unravel the origins of obedience, and the answer might surprise you. It didn't start with kings, laws, or armies. It started with survival. Imagine the earliest human societies. Life was a constant battle against nature. To survive, our ancestors had to coordinate. They hunted together, defended their camps together, and shared resources to make it through another day. In Teeth World, following the group wasn't a choice. It was the only choice. If a hunt was happening, you joined. If a predator was near, you followed the signal to hide. Those who cooperated, who obeyed the unspoken rules of the group, lived to see another sunrise. Those who went their own way, they were isolated, left behind, and their genes were filtered out of history. So, obedience wasn't born from morality or a sense of duty. It was purely practical. It was a survival strategy that worked. And because it worked, it was repeated, generation after generation. These patterns of cooperation became ingrained habits. Think about it. If following the experienced elder's advice on where to find water always led to success, you'd start to trust that elder. This wasn't about power. It was about results. Trust was placed in patterns that led to survival. Over time, this trust began to solidify into a new concept: authority. Elders, skilled hunters, and wise shamans became the natural leaders. People listened to them not because they were forced to, but because experience had shown that listening was the smartest thing to do. This is a crucial point. Obedience didn't begin as a tool of oppression. It began as a shield, a form of collective protection. It was the glue that held fragile communities together. But as societies grew from small bands into larger tribes and eventually into complex civilizations, something shifted. Simple coordination wasn't enough to manage thousands of people. What was needed was structure. A hierarchy. This is where the roles we are so familiar with began to emerge. Leaders and followers, speakers and listeners. This division of labor made large groups efficient and manageable. It allowed for the building of cities, the organization of agriculture, and the creation of complex cultures. However, this efficiency came at a cost. The moment these roles became fixed, obedience changed its nature. It was no longer a situational choice based on who had the most expertise in a given moment. It became a permanent feature of society. You were born into a system that was already built. You didn't choose to obey. You inherited the expectation too. This is where psychology takes over. From the moment we are born, we learn a fundamental lesson. Approval equals safety. A baby cries, a parent responds with food and comfort. A child follows a rule. They receive a smile and praise. This positive reinforcement wires our brains to seek approval and avoid rejection. Disapproval, on the other hand, signals danger. For our ancestors, being rejected or cast out from the group was a death sentence. That primal fear of social isolation is still with us today. This psychological wiring became the ultimate foundation for control. Leaders soon realized that punishment didn't always have to be physical. In fact, emotional and social punishments were often far more effective. Shame, humiliation, exclusion, the fear of being ostracized, of losing your status and your sense of belonging, can be more powerful than the fear of physical pain. When a society reaches this point, control no longer requires constant force. The mind polices itself. People obey to fit in, to belong, to feel safe within the social fabric. This is where obedience truly cemented its power, not through chains and whips, but through our innate human need for connection. By the time the first great civilizations emerged, with their kings and pharaohs, the concept of hierarchy felt completely natural. People obeyed their rulers, not just because the king had an army, but because the very idea of a leader at the top felt right. It felt normal. To question authority was to question the very fabric of reality as they knew it. And so, the foundation of human control was laid, not with steel, but with something far more enduring. Our own survival instincts, transformed over millennia into social rules and psychological needs. We learned to obey long before we were told we must. We learned it because, at its core, obedience was once the only thing that kept us alive. It's a legacy that is still with us, shaping our world in ways we rarely stop to consider. What do you think? Does this ancient instinct still drive our decisions today? The second topic is belief as a building material. Have you ever wondered how societies stay in order? You might think it's all about police, armies, and laws. But what if I told you there's a force far more powerful, something that doesn't need weapons or walls to build empires of control. It's not violence, it's belief. In the earliest days, control was simple. It was about physical force: obey or face the consequences. But this method is exhausting and expensive. You always have to watch your back. True, lasting control needed something smarter, something that could get people to police themselves. This is where belief enters the picture. Once obedience was established, belief became the strongest material to build control. Think about it, unlike force, belief doesn't resist. It doesn't fight back. Instead, it does something much more profound. It justifies. It explains. It even comforts. Early societies discovered a brilliant trick. They didn't just issue commands. They wrapped their rules in stories. Myths, religions, and traditions gave meaning to the way things were. They explained why some people had power and others didn't, creating a hierarchy that felt natural and divinely ordained. Suddenly, a rule wasn't just a command from a chief. It was no longer about a strong man forcing his will upon you. It was about upholding a sacred order. This single shift was revolutionary. Control moved from the outside world of swords and spears and into the inner world of the human mind. Belief transformed obedience into duty. People no longer followed rules simply because they had to, but because they felt they should. It became a matter of personal conviction, of being a good person. This internal motivation is infinitely more effective than external threat. You can't place a guard on every corner, but you can place a conscience inside every person. Why is there so much suffering in the world? Why must we preserve order, even when it feels unfair? The answers provided by these belief systems didn't need to be factually true. They just needed to be accepted. They offered comfort in chaos and purpose in hardship. For example, a belief in karma or a divine plan could explain away inequality. If your low status in this life is a result of past actions or a test for a future reward, you're less likely to challenge the system. You're more likely to accept your fate and work within the established rules. The belief itself becomes a mechanism for stability. Once these systems of belief started to spread, they became self-reinforcing. It's a genius design. Those who benefited from the existing structure, the kings, priests, and nobles naturally became its fiercest defenders. They had every incentive to promote and protect the beliefs that secured their position. And what about those who suffered under the system? They were told it was deserved, a punishment for some wrongdoing, or they were told it was temporary, with a promise of a better life to come, either in the future or in the afterlife. Resistance wasn't always crushed with immediate violence. More often, it was discouraged psychologically. The system made you question your own dissent. Belief also did something else incredible. It created identity. People didn't just obey the rules anymore. They became the kind of person who obeys. Words like tradition, honor, and loyalty became powerful tools. To be loyal meant to support the king. To be traditional meant to uphold the ways of the ancestors. Your identity was tied to your compliance. And if you stepped out of line, the punishment was often silent but severe. A person who questioned too much risked being labeled dangerous. This fear of labels kept people aligned, ensuring they stayed within the accepted boundaries of thought and behavior. This is precisely why belief is so much stronger than force. Belief, on the other hand, shapes generations. It's passed down from parents to children, embedding control so deeply into the culture that it becomes invisible. It becomes common sense, or the way things have always been done. By embedding control within belief, societies built systems that could survive for centuries, even millennia, without constant, overt enforcement. Dynasties could fall, rulers could be overthrown, but the underlying structure of society often remained intact. Why? Because the people themselves believed in it. The peasants, the merchants, the artisans. The artisans, they all carried the architecture of control inside their own minds. Control was no longer something imposed upon them from the outside. It was something they actively defended. They became the guardians of their own submission. And that, right there, is the true, hidden power of belief. It's not just a set of ideas. It's the invisible architecture that holds our world together. It's the foundation upon which civilizations are built and maintained. The strongest walls aren't made of stone. They're made of conviction. The third topic is how control became culture. Have you ever stopped to think about why we do the things we do? Not the big, life-altering decisions, but the small, unconscious choices. How we greet a stranger, what we wear to a wedding, or even the subtle way we organize our day. We often chalk these things up to custom, to identity, to tradition. But what if I told you that the most effective form of control in human history isn't found in prison bars or armed guards? What if it's found in the very essence of what we call culture? This is the central argument we're going to explore today. The most successful form of control is the one that disappears. It is the one that stops feeling like a rule imposed by an authority and starts feeling like the way things are. It's the moment control becomes culture, and once that happens, it turns invisible. Think about the rules you encounter every day. A traffic law feels like a rule because there's an immediate consequence, a fine, a ticket. But how about the rule that dictates you should never speak ill of your family lineage, or that you must treat your elders with a specific, formal defense? These aren't written laws, yet they often feel more binding, more deeply ingrained. When any set of behavioral parameters is repeated across generations, it eventually stops needing enforcement. It becomes a ritual, it becomes a custom. It is absorbed into the very fabric of identity. Culture is essentially a highly sophisticated camouflage for control. It uses comforting things, rituals, customs, language, and shared identity to align individual behavior with what the broader system needs to maintain stability. This shift isn't announced with trumpets. It happens quietly, slowly, across the span of decades. What people eat, how they greet each other, how they express emotion, even the subtle cues of how they show respect, all of it slowly molds itself to fit the mold of the established order. Once control becomes culture, it no longer feels imposed. It feels inherited. And this is the magic trick of cultural control. People begin to defend traditions, not because they understand their origins or whether they are beneficial, but because questioning them feels like an attack on their very identity. Culture turns stark, limiting rules into a source of pride. What once restricted behavior now defines belonging. Think about a national dish, a specific holiday celebration, or even a regional accent. These things are markers of in-group status. Defending them feels like defending your people. This is why cultural control is so immensely powerful and difficult to dismantle. You can overthrow a ruler, you can abolish a government, but trying to remove a deeply ingrained culture feels like erasing people themselves. It evokes existential panic. Now, how does this internalization happen? It relies heavily on the stories we tell and the language we use. Stories are the software of cultural control. History is rarely a neutral recitation of facts. It is almost always told in ways that subtly reward obedience and punish defiance. Our heroes are almost universally those who protected order, who stabilized the system, who followed the established moral code. Conversely, rebels are routinely framed not as freedom fighters, but as dangerous, irresponsible, or destructive elements. We learn which behaviors are celebrated: the quiet, diligent worker, the loyal family member, the person who accepts their assigned lot, and we learn which behaviors are quietly discouraged: the free thinker, the restless traveler, the one who asks too many questions about the foundation. Over time, society learns to self-edit. We don't need a censor. We have a deeply ingrained sense of what is appropriate. The other crucial tool is language. Language evolves to support control by normalizing certain ideas and effectively making others unthinkable. We assign labels. Ideas that challenge the established order are branded unacceptable, disrespectful, radical, or even unnatural. Once an idea cannot even be spoken freely without inviting social sanction, it becomes incredibly difficult to even think about or organize around. If you can't articulate a challenge, the challenge itself begins to dissolve. Think of concepts that were once revolutionary but are now completely mainstream, and conversely, concepts that were once mainstream but are now nearly unspeakable in public discourse. The boundaries of thought are often drawn not by law, but by the vocabulary available to us. Culture is also a master at hiding inequality. When hierarchy is not enforced by military decree but woven into the social fabric, when it is cultural, it begins to feel entirely natural. The roles seem fixed. Expectations feel permanent. We stop asking the difficult question: why do some people hold all the power and resources while others are consistently marginalized? Instead, we attribute these differences to fate, or intrinsic ability, or divine favor, or simply the way the world works. If a certain group is culturally expected to be subservient, their subservience becomes an unavoidable reality, not a consequence of systemic design. But the most insidious level of control happens through when control becomes culture, the system no longer requires external enforcement for every transgression. People monitor themselves, and crucially, they monitor each other. The correction doesn't always come from the distant authority figures. It comes from the immediate, intimate circle, the family, the neighbors, the peers, the religious community. Control spreads horizontally, like a slow-moving, invisible wave. If you deviate from the cultural norm, It's not the state that punishes you. It's the intense social pressure of being excluded, judged, or whispered about. This fear of social death can be far more motivating than the fear of a legal penalty. When a neighbor corrects you for stepping out of line, they aren't enforcing a law. They are enforcing a tradition, a standard of belonging. They are ensuring the continuity of the cultural contract. At this stage, control no longer needs active, visible enforcement. It has become tradition, and tradition rarely looks like a cage. It looks like a heritage, a shared history, a pathway to identity. To truly understand our place in the world, and to gain true agency, we have to start recognizing the control hidden within our customs. We have to be willing to look at the traditions we hold dear and ask, does this practice serve me? Or does it serve the maintenance of a system? Does it foster belonging? Or does it enforce conformity? This is not to say that all culture is inherently bad. Culture provides comfort, shared meaning, and efficiency in social interactions. It allows societies to function without constant negotiation. But we must be perpetually mindful that the line between shared meaning and shared enforcement is incredibly fine. We must retain the right to question, to speak the unspeakable, and to redefine what normal means for us today. The moment we stop questioning why we do things is the moment the cage door locks without us even noticing. If you found this exploration into the invisible nature of control thought, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into sociology and philosophy. Let me know in the comments below, what is one tradition you've ever realized is more about control than comfort? The fourth topic is structures that think for us. Have you ever felt like you're making your own choices, but something still feels off? Like you're playing a game where someone else wrote all the rules. Today, we re-dive in deep into a concept that is both fascinating and a little unsettling. Structures that think for us. Let's start with a simple idea. Control isn't always about force. It's not always a guard with a gun or a law written in a book. The most effective control is the kind you don't even see. It's the kind that becomes part of the air you breathe, part of the culture you live in. Once control is embedded in culture, the next and final step is the automation of thought. This is the stage where people no longer need to be told what to do or what to think. Why? Because the system itself does the thinking for them. Imagine a vast, invisible architecture all around you. This structure isn't made of steel or concrete, but of ideas, norms, and expectations. It's this structure that quietly decides what is considered reasonable. It sets the boundaries for what is seen as moral, and, most powerfully, it defines what is believed to be possible. When your choices are filtered and limited at the very level of thought, the freedom you experience can become an illusion. You absolutely feel free, because you are the one making the choice. But what if you're only choosing from a pre-approved menu? A menu designed by someone else for someone else's benefit. Education is a cornerstone of this architecture. It's not just about what is taught in classrooms. It's equally about what is left out. Think about it. Certain questions are encouraged, celebrated even. They lead down paths of accepted knowledge. But other questions, they're quietly ignored, dismissed as irrelevant, or deemed too complicated. Curiosity, one of the most powerful human drives, is skillfully guided into safe, predictable channels. From the outside, this doesn't look like control at all. It looks like structure. It looks like a curriculum. It looks like responsible guidance. But the effect is the same. It shapes the landscape of the mind. Social systems are incredibly clever at reinforcing this. They reward conformity in subtle, almost invisible ways. Think about the people who get ahead. Often, they are the ones who understand the unwritten rules, who fit neatly into the existing framework. They receive approval, promotions, stability, and social recognition. And what about those who don't fit in? Those who question the framework. They aren't always punished in an obvious way. Open rebellion is rare because the system is smarter than that. Instead, they are sidelined. Their ideas are ignored. They might be labeled as difficult, unrealistic, or not a team player. It's a gentle, persistent pressure. Over time, most people learn a simple, powerful lesson. Fitting in is safer, easier, and more rewarding than standing out. These structures also weaponize our own psychology against us. They cultivate a deep-seated fear of uncertainty. To truly question this is the way we work, the way we live. The things we believe is to step into the great unknown. It's to leave the well-lit path and venture into the dark woods without a map. And as human beings, we are wired to prefer familiar limitations over uncertain freedom. We crave stability. We find comfort in predictability, even if that predictability comes at the cost of our own potential. Control survives, and even thrives, by presenting itself not as a cage, but as a shelter. It offers stability in a chaotic world, and for that, we often trade our autonomy without a second thought. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of this entire process is normalization. When a system has been in place for generations, when it's all you and everyone you know has ever experienced, it ceases to feel like a system at all. It just feels like reality. It feels like the way things are, and the way they have to be. Trying to imagine a different way of living, a different set of values, starts to feel naive or utopian. People begin to confuse what is permanent with what is necessary. We assume that because something has always existed, it must exist for a good reason. At this advanced stage, control no longer needs to argue or persuade. It doesn't need to justify its existence. It simply assumes, and assumptions are the quietest, most powerful gatekeepers of the mind, because they are rarely questioned. We don't argue with the ground beneath our feet, we just walk on it. The system becomes invisible, precisely because it aligns so perfectly with the rhythms of daily life. The job you go to, the family you raise, the beliefs you hold dear, the duties you feel obligated to perform, all of these can move within the predefined boundaries of the structure. It's possible for someone to live their entire life, from birth to old age, inside this architecture without ever once perceiving its walls or seeing its true shape. This isn't an accident. This isn't a random emergent property of society. This is architecture. It's a design. Structures that think for us are elegant in their efficiency. They remove the perceived burden of difficult choices, the anxiety of existential questions, but in doing so, they quietly, methodically remove genuine freedom. And because life continues, because the bills get paid, and the kids go to school, and everything seems to be running smoothly, most of us never even notice the cost. We never feel the loss of something we never knew we could have. And this brings us to the final, chilling conclusion. Control reaches its absolute peak, not when the populace is terrified, not when they are oppressed and angry. It reaches its peak when they are comfortable. It's in the comfort, in the normalization, in the easy acceptance of the status quo, that the most profound control is achieved. The cage is most effective when you don't even know you're in it, when you've learned to love the familiar comfort of its bars. So the question I want to leave you with is this. What are the invisible structures in your life? What are the assumptions you've never questioned? Taking a moment to think about that isn't about tearing everything down. It's about empowerment. It's about reclaiming the right to think for yourself, to question, and to imagine that other ways of being are not just possible, but waiting to be created. If this sparked some thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. What structures do you see? And if you enjoyed this kind of content, consider subscribing for more videos that explore the hidden architectures of our world. The fifth topic is cracks in the system. Have you ever felt like something just isn't right? Not in a dramatic, world-ending way, but a quiet, nagging feeling in the back of your mind. It is the feeling you get when a rule you've followed your whole life suddenly seems a bit strange, a bit arbitrary. This feeling, this tiny flicker of doubt, is where the story of all control systems begins to unravel. No system of control, no matter how powerful or deeply rooted in tradition, is perfect. Think of it like a massive, ancient dam. For centuries, it holds back the water, unmovable and absolute. But eventually, tiny, almost invisible cracks start to form. These aren't caused by a massive earthquake or a sudden explosion. They start with a single drop of water finding a new path, a single question, a moment of quiet discomfort, a sudden realization that a story we've been told for generations doesn't quite add up anymore. These cracks don't appear out of nowhere. They often emerge during times of great change. When a society faces new problems, things our ancestors never had to deal with, the old solutions start to fail. A tradition that once provided comfort and stability now feels empty, or even counterproductive. The gap between what we read told to believe and what we see with our own eyes grows wider. The system, of course, still demands loyalty. It still insists that its way is the only way, but its voice gets a little weaker. Its arguments a little less convincing. This is the moment control stops being an invisible force we take for granted and becomes something we can actually see. It's like the wizard behind the curtain is suddenly exposed. The cracks also appear through people. Not necessarily rebels or revolutionaries, but individuals who just don't quite fit the mold. The outsiders, the thinkers, the artists. People who, by nature or circumstance, stand at the edge of the system and look in. They see its boundaries, its limits. They might not have all the answers, but they possess something far more powerful. The recognition that the rules are universal truths handed down from the heavens. Their constructions, they were built by people and what is built can be questioned. These are the people who notice the emperor has no clothes, even if they're the only ones whispering it at first. Now, how does a powerful system react to these growing cracks? Rarely with immediate, overwhelming force. That would be too obvious. It would prove the doubters right. Instead, the system tries to repair itself. It's a master of adaptation. Old traditions are given a modern makeover. Sacred beliefs are reinterpreted to fit the new reality. New buzzwords are created to explain away the inconsistencies. This flexibility is the secret to their longevity. They don't break, they bend. Control adapts to survive, plastering over the cracks with a fresh coat of paint, hoping no one notices the structural damage underneath. But here's the thing about awareness. Once it starts to spread, it's almost impossible to contain. It's a virus of consciousness. When enough people realize that many of the rules holding society together are maintained not by some inevitable force of nature, but by simple collective agreement, everything changes. Obedience doesn't just vanish overnight. People still stop at red lights, pay their taxes, and follow social norms. But the nature of that obedience is transformed. It becomes conditional. It's no longer automatic, blind, and it's a conscious choice. And that awareness, that simple act of knowing why you are complying, is the ultimate poison to automatic control. The cracks don't always lead to a system's total collapse. Sometimes, they force it to evolve, to become better, fairer, more responsive. The pressure from the cracks can reshape the structure, letting in light and air where there was once only darkness. Other times, however, they expose flaws so deep and fundamental that the entire edifice can no longer be sustained. It becomes a house of cards in a hurricane. But what truly matters isn't the dramatic finale. It's not about the rebellion, the marching in the streets, or the toppling of statues. Those are just the symptoms. The real change, the profound shift, is recognition. True freedom doesn't begin when we break the rules. It begins the moment we truly see them, the moment we understand their architecture, where they came from, and who they serve. Once you see the blueprint of the system, you can never fully unsee it. The illusion of absolute authority is shattered forever. The system might remain, the rules might still be in place, but it is no longer absolute in your mind. It has lost its mystique. Ultimately, all systems of control rely on one thing above all else: invisibility. They function best when we don't even know we're being controlled, when their rules feel as natural as breathing. Awareness is the light that floods the room, revealing the hidden strings, the levers, the gears. And that is where the story of human control truly finds its resolution. Not with a bang, not with a collapse, but with a quiet, collective understanding. The system doesn't have to fall for us to be free. We just have to see it for what it is. And in that seeing, in that awareness, we find our power. Thank you so much for watching. If this video made you think, consider subscribing for more content that explores the deeper structures of our world. We'd love to have you as part of the conversation. See you in the next one.